How people slept in the Middle Ages. Asking how people slept in the Middle Ages sounds embarrassingly pointless. Surely the answer is the same way we do. Well, no, they didn't. They broke the night into two separate sleeps, which is the same way everybody in the pre-industrial world seems to have slept. The sources I've found are heavily tipped toward Europe, but some say the practice clings on in unindustrialized pockets of the world today. The two sleeps. We're talking, remember, about a time before there was much in the way of artificial lighting, so no electricity, no gas lamps. They had candles, sure, but they were expensive and weren't all that bright. And when people went to bed, they either blew them out or risked burning down the house. So when it got dark, they, or most of them anyway, toddled off to bed. We'll talk about the definition of bed in a minute. A couple of hours later, they woke up, not because that was the plan, but because they just did. And they spent another couple of hours, let's say, from 11 to 1, although no one would have been watching the time, either lying awake or up and about, in both cases, without fretting about what was wrong or how they were going to get back to sleep, because waking up in the middle of the night was just what happened. This went on into the early 19th century, and a couple of studies have documented this way of sleeping among non-industrial people, and people asked to live without industrial age lighting and entertainment. What did they do in the interval between sleeps? Some people lay in bed and chatted, because at least in the medieval era, rare was the person who slept alone. Some got up and worked, by moonlight, by starlight, by rushlight. Those were the wax stems of rushes, the candle substitutes of ordinary households. By candlelight, if they could afford candles, although the people who could, you probably didn't need to work in the middle of the night. All the folks you'd expect to recommend prayer and meditation recommended the time between sleeps as a time for prayer and meditation, and no doubt some people did both. Folks drank their religions straight back then. No ice, no mixers. I've read about monks and nuns getting up in the middle of the night and traipsing to the chapel for prayers, and it sounded downright punitive. I imagined someone having to haul them out of their sleepy little beds. This puts it in a different light. They were awake anyway. If the purpose of their lives was to pray, this was a time to go pray. The time between sleeps was also a time for sex and was considered a particularly good time to conceive children. Sex when people weren't sleeping alone. For one thing, sharing a bed didn't mean all its occupants had to get up or stay in bed in unison. For another, I'll go out on a limb here, I've read this somewhere, but haven't looked for a source to confirm what my memory insists on, and say that sex wasn't thought of as something people should do in private. Privacy wasn't a thing yet. Sex has always been a thing. In the early Middle Ages, even your local lord and lady bedded down in the hall with their kids, their hangers-on, their guests, their attendants, their servants, and anyone I've forgotten to list. The solar room for the aristocrats alone, along with maybe a servant or 3 on hand in case they were needed, didn't come into existence until midway through the medieval period. Eventually, people went back to bed for what was called their morning sleep. Bed-sharing beds were communal places, and an entire family might sleep together, with the couple in the middle, the girls arranged on the side nearest the wall, with the youngest closest to her mother, and the boys on the other side, also in age order. But it wasn't just the family tucked up in bed. Non-family members would also be likely to crawl in, and they'd be on the outside: guests, friends, servants, and, as one article I found reminds us all, fleas and lice. When people traveled, strangers who stayed at inns would share a bed. Sleepers and would-be sleepers were expected to minimize their fidgeting and avoid physical contact. beds. If you were rich enough in the medieval era, your bed was elaborate and impressive, with several mattresses straw, then wool, then feather, and sheets, blankets, coverlets, pillows, bolsters, all that good stuff. The bed was your most important piece of furniture. A coverlet? That was a bedspread, although in recent times it seems to have wandered off and become something smaller. The curtains and canopies we think of as the mark of the nobility's beds came into use midway through the medieval period. Middle-ranking people had beds with simple wooden bedsteads, with plain headboards and as much of the accompanying stuff as they could afford. The main thing was that they were up off the floor. Everyone else? It depends on what stretch of time we're talking about, but at least in the early medieval period, they slept on the floor. They might have had a mattress stuffed with straw, wool, hair, rags, or feathers, or some mix of them. Whatever it was made from, it could be moved out of the way during the day. As I write this, a couple of wildflowers, called bedstraw and ladies' bedstraw, have just come into bloom in the hedges. I haven't been able to find out much about bedstraw itself, but ladies' bedstraw, the lady in question of the Virgin Mary, not the local Lady Muck, was added to straw mattresses both for its fragrance and to keep fleas away. It was also believed to ease a birth. If you were at the bottom of the economic and social heap, you slept on straw or hay, or according to one website, the earthen floor. A BBC article says the poor might sleep on a scattering of heather, and I hate to argue with the BBC, but we have some growing out back, and it's pretty woody stuff. I haven't tried sleeping on it, but I have a hunch I'd do better on the bare ground. How do we know any of this? In the 1990s, the historian Roger E. Kirch was researching a book on the history of nighttime. He wasn't expecting to find anything new for a chapter on sleep, but how could he write about night and ignore sleep? So, good historian that he was, he started digging through court depositions where all sorts of odd and wondrous facts about everyday life can be found. What he found was a 17th century case mentioning casually the first sleep, which implies a second sleep. The case was about an incident that happened in the interval between the two. He kept digging and found many mentions of what he was now calling biphasic sleep. It showed up in letters, diaries, medical textbooks, philosophical writings, newspaper articles, ballads, and plays. He found records or hints of it in Europe, Africa, South and Southeast Asia, Australia, South America, and the Middle East, the earliest dating back to the 8th century BC. And somehow, all of that had slipped out of our awareness and our histories. Mystery of Genghis Khan's death. Considered solved. A team of scientists have cleared up the myths surrounding the death of the great Genghis Khan. They claim that his passing might hold a message for today's leaders amidst the threats of the current COVID-19 pandemic. Born Temujin of the Borjigin clan in 1162 AD, Genghis Khan was the legendary Mongol leader who developed a vast empire stretching from the east coast of China west to the Aral Sea. The great Khan was 65 years old when he died in 1227 AD during a campaign against the Chinese kingdom of Xixia. Now, a team of researchers suggest Genghis Khan died from bubonic plague. Lost tomb of the original historical gangster. Genghis Khan was the original historical gangster, HOG. With his rule of violence and terror, Khan controlled everywhere and everything between the Pacific Ocean and the Caspian Sea. According to a recent Live Science article, this domain represented a landmass about 2.5 times larger by territory than the Roman Empire. While the circumstances surrounding the conqueror's birth, his rise to power, and socio-political influence are relatively well known, the events leading up to Genghis Khan's death have remained a mystery, until now, that is. A BBC article explains that after Genghis's death, he was buried in secret. His grieving army carried his body home, killing anyone they met to hide the root. Then once the Khan's body was finally laid to rest, 1,000 horses were marched over his grave to destroy any remaining traces. And then all of those horsemen were killed when they returned. This plan worked, apparently, for over the 800 years since Genghis Khan's death. Not one of the thousands of researchers who have looked for his lost tomb have unearthed so much as a horseshoe. The myths that immortalized a living legend. In the new paper published in the International Journal of Infectious Diseases, the research scientists said the Mongols had been warring against the Western Jia Empire for more than 2 decades when Genghis fell ill. To maintain political security, Genghis Khan's family and closest followers kept the circumstances leading up to his demise as their most carefully guarded secret. Then, in some cases, to immortalize it, and in others to damn his very name, both friends and foes of the Mongols told a number of legends about his death. The authors mention one story that claims Genghis Khan had succumbed to blood loss after getting stabbed or castrated by a princess of the Tangut people, a Tibeto-Burman tribe in northwest China. Another tale says he died of injuries sustained after falling from his horse while fighting against the Chinese the year before his death. Furthermore, another folk tale says he died of an infected arrow wound during his final campaign against the Western Shia. One of the co-authors of the new study, Francesco Galassi, a physician and paleopathologist at Flinders University in Adelaide, Australia, says the tales told of the death of the kings and emperors of Greater China were often mixed with myth. Lessons from the past. Genghis Khan's death and COVID-19. The team of researchers set out to discover, once and for all, how Khan actually died. They say it was the current COVID-19 pandemic that prompted them to consider microbial causes. The History of Yuan is a historical text compiled during China's Ming dynasty. The text claims that from August 18th to August 25, 1227 AD, during Genghis Khan's last campaign against the Western Xia, he felt unwell with a fever that ultimately killed him within 8 days of the first symptoms. Traditionally, typhoid fever was blamed for Khan's death, but Dr. Galassi and his colleagues say in the new paper that no mention of other typical symptoms of that disease, such as abdominal pain and vomiting, were mentioned in the ancient text. What the researchers did notice, however, was that the symptoms matched those of the bubonic plague that was prevalent in that era. Co-author of the paper, Dr. Elena Varotto, an anthropologist and bioarchaeologist at the University of Catania in Italy, said Genghis Khan's death might serve as a general example of the influence of diseases upon leadership, potentially capable of changing the course of history. She went so far as to suggest Genghis Khan's fate may hold lessons for the present-day leaders, as COVID-19 threatens the leaders of our modern nations the same way the plague got Khan. The researchers remind us that infectious diseases have no respect for human power, and they care not for one's class, education, pay grade, or religion. Rampsinit and the Master Thief, Herodotus King. Rampsinit was possessed, they said, of great riches in silver, indeed to such an amount that none of the princes, his successors, surpassed or even equaled his wealth. For the better custody of this money, he proposed to build a vast chamber of hewn stone, one side of which was to form a part of the outer wall of his palace. The builder, therefore, having designs upon the treasures, contrived, as he was making the building, to insert in this wall a stone, which could easily be removed from its place by 2 men, or even by 1. So the chamber was finished, and the king's money stored away in it. Time passed, and the builder fell sick, when finding his end approaching, he called for his 2 sons and related to them the contrivance he had made in the king's treasure chamber, telling them it was for their sakes he had done it, that so they might always live in affluence. Then he gave them clear directions concerning the mode of removing the stone, and communicated the measurements, bidding them carefully keep the secret, whereby they would be comptrollers of the royal exchequer so long as they lived. Then the father died, and the sons were not slow in setting to work. They went by night to the palace, found the stone in the wall of the building, and having removed it with ease, plundered the treasury of a round sum. When the king next paid a visit to the apartment, he was astonished to see that the money was sunk in some of the vessels wherein it was stored away. Whom to accuse, however, he knew not, as the seals were all perfect, and the fastenings of the rooms secure. Still, each time that he repeated his visits, he found that more money was gone. The thieves, in truth, never stopped, but plundered the treasury ever more and more. At last the king determined to have some traps made and set near the vessels which contained his wealth. This was done, and when the thieves came, as usual, to the treasure chamber, and one of them, entering through the aperture, made straight for the jars, suddenly he found himself caught in one of the traps. Perceiving that he was lost, he instantly called his brother, and telling him what had happened, entreated him to enter as quickly as possible and cut off his head, that when his body should be discovered, it might not be recognized, which would have the effect of bringing ruin upon both. The other thief thought the advice good, and was persuaded to follow it then. Fitting the stone into its place, he went home, taking with him his brother's head. When day dawned, the king came into the room, and marveled greatly to see the body of the thief in the trap without a head, while the building was still whole, and neither entrance nor exit was to be seen anywhere. In this perplexity, he commanded the body of the dead man to be hung up outside the palace wall, and set a guard to watch it, with orders that if any persons were seen weeping or lamenting near the place, they should be seized and brought before him. When the mother heard of this exposure of the corpse of her son, she took it sorely to heart, and spoke to her surviving child, bidding him devise some plan or other to get back the body, and threatening that if he did not exert himself, she would go herself to the king and denounce him as the robber. The son said all he could to persuade her to let the matter rest, but in vain. She still continued to trouble him, until at last he yielded to her importunity and contrived as follows. Filling some skins with wine, he loaded them on donkeys, which he drove before him, till he came to the place where the guards were watching the dead body. When pulling 2 or 3 of the skins towards him, he untied some of the necks which dangled by the ass's sides. The wine poured freely out, whereupon he began to beat his head and shout with all his might, seeming not to know which of the donkeys he should turn to first. When the guards saw the wine running, delighted to profit by the occasion, they rushed one and all into the road, each with some vessel or other, and caught the liquor as it was spilling. The driver pretended anger, and loaded them with abuse, whereon they did their best to pacify him, until at last he appeared to soften and recover his good humor, drove his asses aside out of the road, and set to work to rearrange their burthens. Meanwhile, as he talked and chatted with the guards, one of them began to rally him and make him laugh, whereupon he gave them one of the skins as a gift. They now made up their minds to sit down and have a drinking bout where they were, so they begged him to remain and drink with them. Then the man let himself be persuaded and stayed. As the drinking went on, they grew very friendly together, so presently he gave them another skin, upon which they drank so copiously that they were all overcome with the liquor, and growing drowsy, lay down and fell asleep on the spot. The thief waited till it was the dead of the night, and then took down the body of his brother, after which, in mockery, he shaved off the right side of all the soldiers' beards, and so left them. Laying his brother's body upon the asses, he carried it home to his mother, having thus accomplished the thing that she had required of him. When it came to the king's ears that the thief's body was stolen away, he was sorely vexed, wishing therefore, whatever it might cost, to catch the man who had contrived the trick. He had recourse, the priest said, to an expedient which I can scarcely credit. He sent his own daughter to the common stews, with orders to admit all comers, but to require every man to tell her what was the cleverest and wickedest thing he had done in the whole course of his life. If anyone in reply told her the story of the thief, she was to lay hold of him and not allow him to get away. The daughter did as her father willed, whereon the thief, who was well aware of the king's motive, felt a desire to outdo him in craft and cunning. Accordingly, he contrived the following plan. He procured the corpse of a man lately dead, and cutting of one of the arms at the shoulder, put it under his dress, and so went to the king's daughter. When she put the question to him, as she had done to all the rest, he replied that the wickedest thing he had ever done was cutting off the head of his brother when he was caught in a trap in the king's treasury, and the cleverest was making the guards drunk and carrying off the body. As he spoke, the princess caught at him, but the thief took advantage of the darkness to hold out to her the hand of the corpse. Imagining it to be his own hand, she seized and held it fast, while the thief, leaving it in her grasp, made his escape by the door. The king, when word was brought him of this fresh success, amazed at the sagacity and boldness of the man, sent messengers to all the towns in his dominions to proclaim a free pardon for the thief, and to promise him a rich reward if he came and made himself known. The thief took the king at his word and came boldly into his presence, whereupon Rumsinit, greatly admiring him and looking on him as the most knowing of men, gave him his daughter in marriage. The Egyptians, he said, excelled all the rest of the world in wisdom, and this man excelled all other Egyptians. What did the Romans give us? Pollution and climate change. When Pliny the Elder sat composing his Naturalis Historia at some point in the second half of the 1st century AD, he very likely considered the range and even the impact of the rural and urban industrialization he had seen throughout the then empire. By the publication of his first volume in 77 AD, it would not have been possible to travel and view any Roman town, colony, or city without noticing the distinct smell of smoke, possibly hanging in low-lying mists that grew ever stronger and more widespread as one closed in on the gates of the community. With Roman imperial expansion came economic growth, and with growth came increased demand for goods to improve standards of living, materials to build more homes, a need for skilled and unskilled workers, both freemen and slaves, and an ever-increasing desire for minerals. Put all of this together, and we can see the Roman Empire from at least 150 BC onwards, contributing to localized and regional levels of pollution on a scale that had never been seen before, eclipsing the small-scale Celtic industries and impacting on climate change. Gallia Narbonensis. Before his death in the eruption at Vesuvius in 79 AD, ended the life of one of Rome's greatest commentators. Pliny the Elder was a widely traveled commentator on the history and development of Rome. One of the numerous provinces that we know Pliny visited was Gallia Narbonensis, what we would refer to as the south of France today. The administrative center of this great province was modern-day Narbonne, which, in the Roman period, was an expanding military and commercial crossroads between Italy to the east, further Gaul to the north, and Hispania to the west. Pliny described Gallia Narbonensis in this way in his Nauralis Historia. In the cultivation of the soil, the manners and civilization of the inhabitants, and the extent of its wealth, it is surpassed by none of the provinces, and in short, might be more truthfully described as a part of Italy than as a province. Because of its similarities to Italy, Gallia Narbonensis grew into a Roman province at an alarmingly fast rate, partly because it was already known to be an attractive area in which to live or work, and partly because one had to travel through it in order to reach Hispania or move north into central and northern Gaul. But it was also well known for the widespread and cultured Celtic population that postdated the Phoenician and Greek merchants' communities along the coast that had preceded the arrival of the Romans. Most of all, it was the climate, rivers, mountains, and rivers that made this part of France as attractive then as it is now, and hidden beneath the surface, its rich abundance of minerals. The gradual annexation and control over the tribes of southern Gaul took time. Between 120 BC and the accession of Augustus, there was a constant influx and increase in investment, administrative control, and growth that enabled Roman industrial development to spread. In addition, there were no real wars that disrupted life in this province. The Gauls, once they accepted that they had no alternative, seemed to have tried to make the most of newfound economic opportunity as much as anyone. Economic expansion saw a growth in house building. Numerous new towns were established, and with them came demands for housing, triumphal arches, theaters, temples, baths, vast aqueducts, and of course, roads. All of these projects needed investment, labor, and stone, hence the rapid and wide-scale spread of stone mining throughout southern France. But it was not just mining for stone that saw huge swathes of forest cut and burned. Building sites and quarries for all sorts of materials, such as clay, iron ore, and silver, were opened up across the region. Local families vied with merchants from Rome to buy up land, invest in road building and housing companies, and skilled engineers, draftsmen, stonemasons, and potters flooded into the region. Profits were huge, as the number of luxurious villas and towns such as Glanum testify. Glanum is one of the best examples of Roman colonization and magnificence that can still be viewed. Preserved in silt for over 1,500 years, the town displays all the hallmarks of fast and luxurious growth in the Augustan period. But it was not just domestic consumption of these materials within Narbonensis that was impressive. Rome, too, was growing and had a voracious demand for bricks from the hundreds of kilns established alongside the River Rhone to be transported to X, millions of them. Granite for large-scale projects around the Forum also came from the Pyrenees and was moved by barges to Marseille to transport to Rome. Mussels came from mussel farms in Aigues Mortes, wheat from the huge granaries at Barbegal. Wines from all over the region were transported in huge amounts to Rome, and especially from Arelate, modern-day Arles. The production of garum, or fish sauce, was another huge domestic product that was able to build on existing Celtic production to satisfy consumption across the Roman Empire. Demonic exorcisms in the temple schools of Mesopotamia. In the temple schools of Mesopotamia, students learned exorcism rituals, how to mix healing atonements, perform astrology, and how to cure demonic possession. While these skills may seem archaic now, the temple schools actually served as the first medical schools. They even trained their students on the study of contract law, ethics, medical billing, and accounting. They were hubs of intellectual activity. The temple priests produced textbooks to train young. Thanks to the meticulous record-keeping of the Sumerians, archaeologists are able to study their early medical knowledge and religious beliefs. Spirit sicknesses of the Sumerians. What scholars have found is that the Sumerians believed certain spirits cause specific diseases, which could be identified through a patient's symptoms. This spirit entity would enter the body through the patient's head. It was important for the priest to know the name of the entity so that he could prescribe the right treatment. It was as though the names of the demons were the names of the diseases. For instance, one tablet refers to the practice of rubbing someone's head with butter and milk so that they be cleansed of the head disease of heaven. Possessions in Mesopotamia were not limited to diseases of the head. Symptoms of demonic possession could be felt throughout the entire body. According to another tablet, symptoms of demonic possession can begin in the muscles of the body. The possessed patient can have fever and chills, as well as intestinal problems, pain in the abdomen that radiates to the back, as well as chest pain. In this case, the demon did not attack the head. However, the treatment called for purifying the patient with water, then wrapping his head with a bandage and juniper leaves. He must leave this bandage on for 1 full day, then discard it. This method supposedly drew the demon out of the patient's skull. The Mesopotamian hell plaque, one specific exorcism rite, is detailed on a bronze figure of the demon Pazuzu, whose outstretched arms are holding a tablet depicting symbols similar to those on the boundary stones, a type of stone document used that records the end of one land and the beginning of another. It is a small amulet, only about 5.5 inches, 14 centimeters high, by 3.5 inches, 9 centimeters wide. It is referred to as the Hell Plaque. On the top first row are divine symbols like those typically found on boundary stones, including the symbol of Utu. Utu, later known as Shamash, was the ancient Mesopotamian sun god. He represented truth, justice, and morality. According to Sumerian mythology, Utu was the twin brother of the goddess Inanna, the queen of heaven. He would spend his days traveling through the sky in a sun chariot, keeping a watchful eye on all the humans below. It was believed that he was very powerful and would intervene between demons and humans to help those in distress and enforce divine retribution. Utu was depicted as a solar disk. This appeared as a circle with a 4-pointed star, pointing to the cardinal directions, like a compass. Overlapping that were four wavy lines stemming from the center between each of the points on the four-pointed star. This symbol is seen all over Mesopotamian art, as it symbolized warmth and light from the sun, as well as power. Also included on the top are the symbols for other deities such as Ea, depicted by a mace with ram's head, Marduk by a spearhead, Adad by a lightning fork, Nebo by his double staff, Ishtar by an eight-pointed star, Sin by the crescent, and the Sabiti, identified with the Pleiadian star system and depicted as 7 circles. The second row shows 7 Galu, the earliest root of the word ghoul, demons that carried victims off to the Mesopotamian underworld, having the heads of animals. These animal-human hybrid beings are a common element among human depictions of demons. It is a theme that arises from the pressures of adapting from a primitive or wild existence to one that is more civilized. This theme is found throughout ancient art and proto-literature, hinting to a dualistic concept of good versus evil, or the struggle between wild man and civilized man. The exorcism rite of the Hell plaque. The third row of the Hell plaque shows the actual exorcism rite. In the middle, there is a possessed person lying on a bed. At the head and foot of the bed are priests, which are identified by their fish-like robes, indicating that they are priests of the water god, Ea. There is a demon behind the right priest who is holding 2 other demons at bay. The other priest is holding a lamp, which symbolizes the god of fire, Nusku. The last row shows objects such as a bowl, water bladder, 2 jars, and various foods. These are offerings for the demons. In the very center of this last row is a large depiction of the demon Lamashtu, who is holding a snake each hand. She is breastfeeding 2 pigs and kneeling on a donkey, which is her symbol. The donkey is resting on a ship, sailing on water, where there are fish swimming from left to right. To Lamashtu's left is her threatening husband, Pazuzu, who is trying to attack her with a whip. Pazuzu was summoned by the priests to defend the patient from her. The demon Pazuzu was often invoked to protect pregnant women and mothers against Lamashtu, because she would steal their babies out of jealousy. This was the explanation for miscarriages, stillborn infants, and sudden infant death, making tablets and amulets of Pazuzu some of the most popular in ancient Mesopotamia. The extensive otherworld of the 6 Sumerians. The Sumerians did not believe in just one type of spirit. They believed in entities similar to demons, devils, and even ghosts, all of which could enter a person through possession. Some were demons from the underworld, while others were simply sad, lost souls. In order to know the difference, the exorcist would pay close attention to the patient's symptoms as well as consult his manual. For example, if a person in life was unloved, abused, and neglected to the point wherein they were starved to death, that tortured soul would seek to inhabit the body of someone else. Once in that body, however, their maligned nature would be expressed in the patient. This could make the patient feel symptoms of depression, loneliness, nausea, loss of appetite, chills, and weakness. Therefore, the healing rite or exorcism could include making a nice meal for the spirit and offering it positive affirmations, in addition to medicinal herbs. This practice offers a glimpse into the minds and hearts of ancient Sumerians. Regardless of the science or logic, one thing it does indeed show is a level of compassion on the part of the ancient people. Who were the blue stockings? You've just been dropping into the 18th century. You are A, privileged, B, clever, and C, female. That letter C is going to cause you trouble. And you can expect some grief from the end parenthesis as well. You're expected to be mindless, pretty, if possible, and above all, childbearing. After that, well, there is no after that. That's your role. Abandon hope, ye who expected more out of life. The rational creatures in your world are all male. Just ask one if you don't believe it. If you think you're also rational, you'll have a hard time convincing anyone of it, and you'll cause all sorts of social embarrassment by trying. Any form of ambition will also cause embarrassment. You will, of course, have been educated, but only to be a wife and mother, to manage a prosperous household, and to be decorative, fashionable, demure, graceful, and several other adjectives. You will have learned reading, embroidery, music, dancing, drawing, a little history and geography, maybe a bit of French, just enough to make yourself agreeable to men, and above all, marriageable. Those are the limits of your expectations, so let's shift to the past tense. I don't want to trap you back there for too long. Or myself. I'm about to hyperventilate. Did I make any of that up because I'm a childless cat lady? Sadly for the people who lived through that era, and sadly for our era, which inherited a surprising number of assumptions from theirs. No. By way of example, the statesman Lord Chesterfield wrote to his son in 1748 that women are only children of a larger growth. They have an entertaining tattle and sometimes wit, but for solid, reasoning good sense. I never knew in my life one who had it, or who reasoned and acted consequentially for 24 hours together. With a bit more generosity, Dr. John Gregory wrote in A Father's Legacy to his daughters, 1774, "If you happen to have any learning, keep it a profound secret, especially from men who look with a jealous and malignant eye on a woman of cultivated understanding." This is the world the Bluestockings came from, and whose conventions they both broke and stayed within. The conventions they broke. The Bluestockings were never a formal organization. They were a social and intellectual circle made up for the most part of affluent English ladies, and they're best known today for having hosted gatherings where men and women spoke on equal terms about literature, art, history, philosophy, science, foreign affairs, and pretty much anything except politics. And as Margaret Talbot puts it in the first article I linked to, England made room for them with a kind of condescending, self-congratulatory gallantry. They hosted some of the age's top talent, including Samuel Johnson, Edmund Burke, David Garrick, Horace Walpole, and other men of letters, aristocrats with a literary bent, diplomats, painters, politicians. In short, people who mattered. But they were more than simply hostesses. These were highly educated women at a time when the doors of any serious school were closed to girls and women. Some were self-educated. Some were educated at home by unconventional parents. But having attained an education, against all the odds, they were shut out of most of the public spaces, such as coffee houses, where men discussed the issues of the day. The only way they were going to be part of those discussions was to bring the discussions into their homes, hence the hostessing. The men they invited had something to gain as well. Gatherings that discussed serious subjects were in sharp contrast to the usual social evenings of their class, which involved drinking, cards, of course for money, silly, and, as Talbot puts it, getting up to sexual shenanigans. That helps explain why the blue stockings offered lemonade and tea instead of booze. But the blue stockings did more than just host salons. Many of them went on to write novels, criticism, history, classical scholarship, and endless letters. Letters were the social media of the day. Others worked as translators. One of them, Elizabeth Montagu, published an essay that was influential in establishing Shakespeare as a central figure in England's national identity. The essay first appeared anonymously, and after it became a smash hit, in the small circles where these things could be smash hits, it was republished under her name. Publishing was more than just a way to participate in the national conversation. It was one of the few fields where a woman could keep the money she earned. She couldn't go into business or own property in her own name, but she could publish. The conventions they kept, but far from throwing all conventions out the window, they lived the conventional lives of ladies of their class, running their households and caring for aging parents, as women were expected to. Elizabeth Carter, whose translation of Epictetus held its place as the standard translation for the next century, is described by Gibson as always careful to present herself as the perfect woman, meek and modest, diffident and self-effacing, completely unthreatening to male authority. She could make a pudding as well as she could translate ancient Greek. And then there was class. As ladies of their class were meant to be, they were snobs. One, Hannah More, had helped a working-class woman publish her first book of poems, and when the book was successful enough to bring in some money, she pressured the author to put her money in a trust administered by Moore and another upper-class blue stocking. Because how could such a woman be trusted with her poor children's money? As you can see from the quotes, they didn't break the conventions around capitalization either. They capitalized anything they damn well pleased. Another tale involves conventions around both class and women's bodies, and religion. When the widow Hester Thrale married her daughter's music teacher, her blue-stocking former friends were toxic about it. He was of the wrong class, he was foreign-born, and he was Catholic. She was giving in to passion, and they were above passion. As one wrote, overbearing passions are not natural in a matron's bones. Part of the problem with passion was that their intellectual claims rested on their respectability. One whiff of scandal and the whole structure might collapse. The rest of the problem was that in their world, women were thought of as physical and men as intellectual. And in order to emphasize women's rationality, they saw themselves as standing outside their bodies. That made them refined and respectable. That was the basis for equal treatment. Lose that, and they were back to being just baby makers. Their name, the name Blue Stockings, came not from what the W. Oman wore, but from a single man at one of those salons, or so the story goes. A botanist, Benjamin Stillingfleet, was invited and didn't bother to change from the blue worsted stockings he wore in the field to the white silk stockings upper-class men wore to formal occasions, or else he was invited and declined because he didn't have the appropriate clothes, and his hostess told him to come in his blue stockings, or else, as one article claims, the respectable stockings were black, not white. It doesn't matter, and I can't be bothered chasing that down. My money's on white. Believe whatever version you like. Believe them all if you can manage. Either way, the story has nothing to do with what the women wore. The women accepted and used the term. Later, When their time had passed, blue-stocking became an insult something to call a woman with intellectual ambitions and unbecoming opinions. And the radicals who would have been sympathetic to their inherent feminism overlooked them as elitist and conservative. Still, history didn't erase them. The blue-stockings had an effect on Jane Austen, Mary Wollstonecraft, and much later, Virginia Woolf, and through them, on us. Nothing is lost. I swear it to you. Iraqi transport minister announces that Sumerians launched spaceships 7,000 years ago. The Minister for Transport in Iraq made a controversial speech at the inauguration of a new airport in southern Dakar, in which he stated that ancient Sumerians built the first airport 7,000 years ago and launched spaceships from there to explore other planets. He also claimed that all the world's angels were Sumerian. To support his claims, he referred to the work of Samuel Kramer, Russian professor and Sumerian expert, who highlighted the Sumerians' advanced understanding of the cosmos. The Sumerians were the first known people to settle in Mesopotamia over 7,000 years ago. Located in the southernmost part of Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, modern-day Iraq, Sumer was often called the cradle of civilization. By the 4th millennium BC, it had established an advanced system writing, spectacular arts and architecture, astronomy, and mathematics. The Sumerians recorded their astronomical observations as early as 3,500 to 3,200 BC. Astronomical phenomena were important to the Sumerians, who equated planets with gods that held an important role in their mythology and religion. Jupiter, for example, was associated with their main god, Marduk, patron deity of the city of Babylon. Arab news channel Al-Bawaba reported that Minister Kadhim Finjan al-Hamami made his comments during a visit to a new airport construction site in southern Iraq, near Basra, where he claimed that the Sumerians had built an airport in exactly the same location in around 5000 BC. It's a long story, maybe you don't know about it. Maybe even people from Dakar don't know. The first airports that were built on planet Earth were built in the 5th millennium BC in Dakar, Al-Hamami said in an Al Jazeera translation. There were Sumerians who launched spaceships from Dakar and headed to other worlds, he added, arguing that all the world's angels were Sumerian and stating that Sumerians were the first to discover Pluto. While no one in the audience questioned the minister, listeners were quick to jump to social media to rubbish his claims. The Middle East Monitor shared comments from internet users who criticized the incompetence of the government. Iraqi transport minister's hallucinations about spaceships in Nasiriyah proves that the Haidar al-Abadi government is full of fools, hashish addicts, and the most worthless of humanity, said Dawood al-Basri. To support up his claims, Finjan referred to the work of the late Samuel Kramer, who was one of the world's leading Assyriologists and a world-renowned expert in Sumerian history and Sumerian language. In his book, History Begins at Sumer, Kramer argues that the Sumerians had the first achievements in all the major fields of human endeavor, including government and politics, education and literature, philosophy and ethics, law and justice, agriculture, and medicine. However, critics of the transport minister's speech say that Kramer never mentioned ancient airports or spaceships. Nevertheless, the minister does have a number of supporters among ancient astronaut theorists who argue that intelligent extraterrestrial beings visited Earth and made contact with humans in antiquity, with many believing that ancient Sumer was the first place in which contact was made. Assyrian epilepsy god. A researcher studying an ancient Assyrian cuneiform tablet has found an image of a demon. The demon was believed to have been the cause of epilepsy. The tablet was used to treat health conditions, and the discovery of this epilepsy demon is allowing us to better understand the era when medicine and magic were one. The epilepsy demon was found by Troels Pank Arbel of the University of Copenhagen during research work sponsored by the Edinburgh Foundation. He is a noted Assyriologist who studies the ancient Assyrian people who lived in what is now northern Iraq, south of the modern city of Mosul. The Assyrians created an important ancient civilization that established two empires and the first professional army. The civilization flourished between 2000 and 600 BC. Epilepsy demon discovered. The researcher was re-examining a cuneiform tablet that is dated to 2,700 years ago. It is written in a variant of Akkadian, a Semitic language which was once widely spoken in the Mesopotamian region, but is now extinct. The cuneiform system of writing uses symbols to represent a complete word or sound. Cuneiform is notoriously difficult to interpret, and only a small number of specialists can read it accurately. As he was studying the tablet, the expert discovered a partially damaged image on its back. He investigated the crude drawing, and he soon made out that it was a figure. The figure had horns, a lizard's or snake's tongue, and more than one tail. Arbel realized that he had found a demon, and after reading some more of the cuneiform, he found that it was the cause of the dreaded illness Bennu epilepsy, according to futurity, demonic possessions and exorcisms. The Assyriologist identified the demon, which the ancient civilization believed to cause epilepsy. The Assyrians and other cultures referred to epilepsy as Bennu. This was a widely feared condition that is described in the cuneiform writing. On the tablet, the symptoms included seizures, unconsciousness, and mental illness. Another symptom was that those afflicted would cry like a goat. Ancient peoples such as the Assyrians believed that diseases and illnesses were caused by supernatural beings, gods, or black magic. They believed, like the Sumerians, that certain spirits caused people to fall ill, and these could be identified by specific symptoms. Curing illness was concerned with exorcising people of evil spirits, such as the demon Pazuzu or the evil goddess Lamashtu. Arbel stated that healers were responsible for expelling these supernatural forces and the medical symptoms they caused by drugs, rituals, or incantations, according to futurity. In ancient Mesopotamia, skills such as exorcism were taught in temple schools, which could possibly be the world's first medical schools. They would have routinely used cuneiform tablets in their treatments. Drawings of demons and spirits are very rare on cuneiform tablets, although they often appear on bronze plaques thought to help to expel demons. The University of Copenhagen quotes Arbel as saying that this is the first time that we have managed to connect one of the very rare illustrations of demons in the medical texts with the specific disease epilepsy. Lunacy through history. Typically, the healer would not have drawn the figure of the demon who caused a specific illness, and this makes the find so important. The tablet also gives us some insights into the beliefs regarding the demon. Arbel stated that the tablet suggests that the demon acted on behalf of the lunar god Sin when it inflicted a person with epilepsy, reports the University of Copenhagen. The Assyrians believed that there was a link between the moon and this condition, and this influenced many other cultures. The words lunatic or lunacy in English are ultimately derived from lunar, an adjective relating to the moon. This chance discovery shows that ancient ideas about healing were very influential down the centuries. Moreover, it adds to our knowledge of Assyrian beliefs about the supernatural and healing. The findings of the research are published in the Journal de Médecine Cuneiforme,